Hello, and welcome to another exciting adventure in theology and ice cream. This week we don't have ice cream, but I'm excited to share with you that I got an early Father's Day present from my mother, interestingly enough, a new freezer bowl. Now I know what you're saying, like, wow. But for those of you who don't know why that's exciting, is because I've had an ice cream maker since 2005 or so, and I've made varieties of ice cream since then. You name it, I take suggestions, and I like to be creative. Most of the recipes online don't actually have a lot of good tips, so I keep it basic, but I also like to explore some things. So, with that in mind, I like an ice cream maker since 2000. I like to try out new ideas, new paths, but with only one freezer bowl, it's been a problem because I can do a batch of ice cream and then I have to wait usually about 2 days or so to get to freeze it up again so it can be used again. So I can't do anything that has mixed flavors, or if I have to do two batches of ice cream of different flavors, I have to plan ahead. So now I have two freezer bowls, and I can do some mixes. I can get the ingredients ready and do two quick batches. So within 40 minutes, I could have ice cream and then mix and match, or do some quick flavors. It's very exciting. So ice cream is part of the background of my theology because we all need some ice cream. And when the world has its problems and disasters, which are rightly attended to, at the same time, the human soul, the human emotions, were actually not made for long-term panic or long-term stresses or long-term emotions, and it starts settling into us, and then we become on edge, and it's like our emotions start becoming analogy that just popped to mind is kind of our emotions become diabetic of sorts. Like a diabetic can't process sugar, and their insulin levels just don't match, and so it's actually when you have too much, you have weight issues. You can actually, I don't have diabetes, but I've reached points in my life where the doctor says, I think you're pre-diabetic, and so that is an issue. But it's also one of those things where our emotions do that too. We can actually get caught up in the emotional problems and concerns, and our ability just doesn't have any capacity to handle it, and we don't realize it, but there's something broken in us. So, one of the things we need is both deep thoughts, heavy conversation, but we also need some variety. Sometimes we just need some water, some fish jumping in it, even if it's fake water. This is scenery. So I'm also streaming here on Twitch, and on Twitch we have games, and I'm not playing a game, but in the background I thought a good way of doing some variety of stuff is having some scenery. I like to have scenery. This is Skyrim. Skyrim, yes. So I am talking here about theology, because that's what I do. I talk about theology. Professor at Fuller Seminary. But one of my passions is just not, convince. If I can convince you, great. If it's just about learning and sharing and listening. One of the great projects I did this last week was working on a book project where we gathered together scholars from a lot of different traditions and backgrounds. And I appreciate it, not because the goal was to agree on everything, but the goal of this was to get people together to talk and share. Because in our environment, we're at this point where we think to talk to someone means we have to either convince them or agree with them. And yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for the donation. I'm not keeping up. So I really appreciate that. Yes. That is a special bonus. Sorry, I got involved in my sentence and was going to follow up in that. I always appreciate any kind of thanks, and that's an extra bonus. So, thank you. I forgot what I was saying because that was actually nice. Because let me just share with you my day. I had a good morning, great presentation, other things going on. And then just like stuff was happening. Bring real background with money. Go outside. One of our problems, we've just had so much stuff going on, and then I forgot what I was saying. Days where just a lot of stuff just piles up in the background. It's not like this major disaster, but it's like one thing after another. It hits, and so here's a scene from the factory. I don't know what this is. It's been too long since I've played this, and it's just a dwarf factory. I think it might be, or what do they call them in Skyrim? I forget. It's an ancient thing that you go in and there's all this technical machinery, but watch out for the mechanical spiders. And today was just one of those days where it was just like boom, 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 good morning, but boom, like this kind of things were knocking me down all afternoon, and I ended up getting a bad stomach ache, and I honestly was about to cancel the discussion this evening just because it was one of those times where I felt still not great, but I honestly just didn't want to, and so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, Patrick, just show up. Sometimes that's really what I'm talking about. Sometimes in life it's about having this great experience and really going in and feeling this excitement, and sometimes we just have to show up. So, and then when we show up, nice things happen. I actually gave a quiz this last week. I teach a theology class at Fuller Seminary, and I teach on Father, Son, and Spirit, and Trinity, and so it's this Systematic Theology 1, and it's this long, there's a lot of writing, they had a major research paper, they had a lot of stuff going on. There's 2 quizzes, a midterm and a final, and all online, and everyone's very stressed with all this that's all going on, and in the final, I don't tell them I'm doing this, but if any students are watching who have me in the future, they'll find this out, so, tip here. Easter egg? No, that's not what it's that I actually the final exam has one question on it, and it's, did you take the test? Are you taking this test? And of course, if they answer yes, because they are taking it, they get 10 points, which is the 10 out of 10. And I have this long paragraph talking about how sometimes when we're stressed and overwhelmed, we feel like there's just too much stuff going on, and we just want to back out. But this is where grace comes in. And in just showing up, we experience a form of grace and peace and life. And it was my way of saying, thank you for showing up. Here's a lesson on grace. You get 10 points just for showing up here. And while it doesn't measure the kind of thing a quiz usually does, throughout the class we're talking about God's work and God's love and grace and a lot of these related themes. And I think the object lesson of them coming into this with a great, huge amount of stress and worry and really burned out with the stuff that's going on around them, but also just exhausted after the end of the quarter, to then have a test say, you gear yourself up for it, you get ready, and then to say, it's just easy. That is a teaching on grace that is more profound, I think, than any long lecture I could give. They tasted what grace is like, because I don't have to do that. In fact, there's this pedagogical part of me that says I probably shouldn't, because I'm not really measuring, but it's this way of teaching, that of taking them at this moment of stress and saying, so that's this. So I'm here. I'm here not because I want to, but because it just felt right to do. And sometimes we just show up. It's odd to say I don't want to be here, but that's how life is, right? Sometimes we're in this situation where I would just rather be sitting on the couch and just blanking, right? So here I am. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the church still. And as I said in the last couple of weeks, it just felt right to do. Ooh. And as I said in the last couple of weeks, I gave a little bit on the marks of the church. How do you define church? The doctrine of the church and the doctrine of this Holy Spirit are my 2 professional specialties. So I can go into a lot of details about the differences and realities and all the rest. But that's not really what I'm doing here. When we say out of the Apostles' Creed, which is what we're going through, I believe in the church, we're not saying all these parts and functions and historical divisions, and that might be helpful to understand, but that's not really what I believe in. So what is it I believe in? And this is where I made a turn after the first week to talk about not just here's how what you would call a church and the offices and all the kind of the details that people get caught up with. Really, when I in this sharing, as I go through, I'm saying, what is it I believe about the church? I believe in the church. See that? Do you see that distinction? Not I believe in the church. I believe in the church. I think there's something to the church that's actually really important, which is, I know, an absurd thing to say for those of you who have bad experiences with churches, and even those of you who have middling experiences with churches, let alone those who have no experience of churches but have just heard about it on the news. To say I believe in the church makes me sound like a bit of a fundamentalist, and maybe I am, but not the kind of fundamentalist that you're thinking. I actually believe in the fundamentals of what is it that Scripture intended. How is it the early church led in developing a community of people who were transcending the rules and barriers and dysfunctions of the society they were in, and saying there's actually a better way of doing this that doesn't uphold the kind of class status or other divisions that separate everyone else. Is there a way to actually get people from diverse backgrounds with a bunch of different kinds of personalities into a shared community, so that we're working toward a new kind of experience of humanity? Yes. So my answer to that is yes. But it's so crazy difficult, because what you see around us is people thinking that would be a good idea. I mean, maybe even like a universe size. People thinking this would be a good idea, but they just get caught up. And all the utopian visions of humanity have often said, okay, we're going to do this, and then humans get in the way, right? So we have these problems, we have these complications, we have these barriers that around us as keep us stuck. What we need is another kind of empowerment, a new kind of life, a new vision for life, a salvation from the old life. And that's where what Christianity says happens in Jesus on the cross, who said, here's the new way of living, and I'm going to break the powers of the old and empower a new way, and I'm going to give you the Spirit of God to live this out, and the Spirit of the God then fills the people, and now we can begin to live in the new way if we're actually attentive to this new identity. But it's so easy to be caught up in the old. It's so easy to be distracted. It's so easy to be co-opted. Sorry. It's so easy to be pulled, because we get this idea of here's our method, and then we're going to do it the way the world wants to. And what happens? And we start looking a lot like the rest of the world does. We don't end up being differently. We do the same problems. We run into the same dysfunctions. We're now separated by class or race. So many of the discussions we're having currently in our society now, I live in Sacramento, has to do with the fact that the early church believed in transcending these barriers of race and sex and all, and yet the world comes back in and says, no, you have to do this. Churches in the early American history were caught in this division. Some said we actually can be this diverse place, but so many more, sadly, were saying, no, we want to look like the rest of society and be all respectable in that way. And then in the Civil War, you had entire churches split. My own church, the Wesleyan Church, split off in the 1840s from the Methodist Church, because the Methodist Church was more wanting to please rich slave owners, and so started turning away from John Wesley's motives to say we're going to be not okay with slavery, and then we're going to support slavery. Well, the Wesleyans said, no, slavery is an evil. It's not just wrong or, it's a mistake. It's actually an evil sin against God. We can't abide having communion with people who are engaging in this. And there's something to that motive that isn't about what do we do on a Sunday morning, or who's in charge, or who speaks, or who doesn't speak, or what happens in communion. There's something in that that is a deeper, richer kind of reality that says what the church is this empowered community that are living out this new life, and sometimes that means embracing people and speaking wholeness and speaking life and speaking hope into the world. And sometimes that means protesting things that the world is doing, protesting oppression, protesting brokenness. And in those frames, how do you then describe what it is this community is about? Well, I think one way of doing that is following the lead of a theologian named Jürgen Moltmann, who says our goal in this journey is to really further life, to embrace life. And that's not some kind of new age, way of separating us from true Christianity. This is what Christianity is about. Jesus is the way, the life. We have hope, we have life, we have fullness of life. All through the Bible, there's discussions about the pursuit and experience of a new kind of life. I love C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, because when he talks about heaven, he doesn't talk about this floaty, separate kind of experience. He doesn't talk about this like these spirits floating around. He actually compares heaven and hell in a fascinating way, because for him, hell seems like this really big, expansive place, but really it's this small, microscopic place where people are ethereal. They're very empty, and they're separate, and there's this, you get caught up in your own self, and you think that's who you are, and yet you're separated farther and farther from everyone else. But it's still in this, you become so small and tiny, and just fake, right? But then heaven, there's these field trips to heaven. I don't know how that fits in the Bible, but I love the story. Field trips, I think it's just because it's like, here, have a taste of the real. When they get to heaven, they get out and they grow, and they get out, and they can hardly walk at first because the blades of grass go through their feet. It's like stabbing, because heaven is not emptier or more airy. It's actually more real. The grass is more real. The colors are more real. All the people there are more who they are, more real, more whole, larger, bigger, better. Sounds like the Bionic Man, right? Some of you who are over 40 will get that reference. And this is how the discussion even in Scripture says. It's not that the work of God and ultimately then the expression of the church is about depersonalizing or dehumanizing or restricting or repressing. There's aspects to discipline, but that's in a way to say there's more of who you can be. How can we be a community who gather together and say, let us work together in light of the Spirit of God to become full of life, to celebrate life, to seek life for us, for others, in all its splendor that goes so far beyond what so much of the world says is possible, that we're willing to let go parts of the world and parts of the things that the world says you have to do this or you have to have that, because it's like a good diet, or it's like anything where it's like, I'm going to let go this thing that might feel right in the moment because there's this better experience. I feel better. Like I said, I had a really bad stomachache this afternoon, and I think it was because I had a smoothie, which the yogurt might be a little questionable. I might be wrong about that, but there was just something in that caused my stomach to go bad, and it was like, it tasted good in the moment, but it caused this whole stuff. So I pretty much lost my whole afternoon, and I'm feeling better now. But there was such a sense of loss, and now I'm like, well, maybe I should pay attention to what I eat better. And here's a lumber mill. So getting back to what I believe in the church is this way of life and hope. Part 3, what furthers life is whatever spreads reverence for life and the affirmation of life through love for life. So there's this redemptive presence. We talk about redemption sort of as this as often transaction. The same thing. Oh, interesting. It just must be something going around. There is a lot going around, but I feel like I'm inside. Maybe there was something. Who knows what's going on? Who knows what's going? Like what else? Let's see what else 2020 can throw at us. Let's try a stomachache. Uh, we talk about redemption kind of almost as a transaction version of uh, this world, a way of hold on. Okay, there we go. And sort of between me and God, and He redeems me from the past, and then I can sort of go. It's like the ticket. It's the ticket to get into Disneyland. That's how often we see it. It's like, okay, you redeem your ticket, and it's really something different. There's what I think when we think of redemptive presence, we think of a kind of person who, when you're around, you feel more alive. You feel more empowered. You feel like life is possible. Have you ever been around those kind of people where you like being around them, not because there's just something specific they do, but there's something about them that just makes you feel alive and happy and better and at peace? Do you have someone who's like, I don't know what it is, but I just feel peace when I'm here? And that's a redemptive presence, because what it's doing is taking this brokenness that we bring around us. We all have these chains like Marley carried around, all these things we carry around, and what we need is this someone to say, you don't have to carry that stuff. Now, ultimately, we say Jesus offered this redemption. But because of the work of Jesus that invites people into this process, we too can be a redemptive presence who speak and also interact with people in a way that brings us life. What does a redemptive presence do? Longs for liberty. Not just for what can I get, but longs for, these people are really stuck. How can I help them? These people are really broken. What can I do for them? These people are, they don't know where to go. Can I help guide them? And redemption from a body of death, redemption from those stories of fear of death, and redeemed from that kind of fear and panic that drives so many people, and says, you know what? We have a common destiny, and that destiny can have hope. There might be really bad things, and there are bad things, and they might take something from us. They might give us a real bad stomach ache or a headache or cause disaster, but those don't define us. What defines us? There's this hope we have in God. Now, what if you were around a whole community of people that shared this hope? That rather than give in to panic, we're attentive to the hope that we can have in each situation. Not in sort of a naive, rejection of danger. I don't think there's anything of that. It really is this, I realize that this is really serious and hurtful, but don't give up. Don't give in to the panic. We're going to get through this together. We need those kind of people. And a community of those kind of people starts actually speaking into the life of the world. So we join, here's a good sentence for you. Feel free to repeat this one. Join in with the holistic God in light of the ecological movement. What does that mean? That doesn't just mean in light of the helping the planet and being green and all those things. It includes that, I think, because we're participating in life. But it also means in an ecological movement in which all the different pieces of our society and culture and people and all the rest is actually part of a shared experience of living for us. I live in a kind of ecology here in Sacramento. I live around certain kind of neighbors and certain kind of trees and certain kind of weather and all the rest, and how I live in light of that says much more about me than anything I'm saying right now. If I am, saying, well, here, go and love your neighbor, but really a jerk to people, well, right? I'm not living in the ecology of my own experience, because I'm not finding how is it that being here I can thrive in light of the calling of Jesus. Now, I may want to be somewhere else, but that's not where I am. And rather than being caught up in this isn't good enough, it's the invitation to say always, what hope can I have, but also what hope can I bring others? And even as I'm saying that, I will admit there's a thread in my head that is convicted right now in my saying of this, because I realized And some of you are part of my church community, so this is going to be very confessional, right? And you're like, woo, now we get some good stuff. I realize that I'm an online teacher. I teach online. I work from home. So the transition to working from home wasn't a big deal. But I also realize I'm the kind of person that if I'm not present with people, that I have a very strong tendency to sort of float away. I told Amy, my wife, I'm a lot like a helium balloon. If you untie me, I just kind of do this. I just sort of float away. And it's not anger. Sometimes I have a lot of emotional responses to context, and that's actually a good sign because it's just something that I'm caring about. But I realized in the last couple of weeks that this extended time of separation from people has created a sense of distance in my head that I really now have to be intentional about reaching out to people and feeling a connection with those in my church. And there's a deep part of me that just is drifting. And the mature stance in me is saying that is true, and it's also saying it here, because in saying it out loud, I'm acknowledging the fact that I might be looking disconnected, and I am, and I'm trying to say, well, that's probably, and I'm saying what I just said before is that's not a good thing, but it's something that I'm going to have to be attentive to because I'm not somewhere else. I'm not out in the mountains. I'm not at the beach. I'm here, and this is where God has me. So what does that mean for this moment so that I can be an empowering presence in light of the Spirit's work, rather than do you do the funny voice? Is there a funny voice? Now I'm confused. Oh, the helium. All right. Sorry. I got it. I love that I got it 2 seconds before you talked. Yes, here's my helium voice. That is great, because whenever now I get this mood, I'm going to do the silly helium voice and make fun of myself. One of my tricks of finding balance is not taking myself seriously, and that is actually oddly helpful. And it's also why I probably couldn't be good at like an artist or someone, because they have to take themselves very seriously, and I don't often take myself seriously, even though I'm sometimes talking about serious things. So sometimes I'll have a squeaky voice. But there's this tendency of like, I just don't want to be here anymore. And I think there's this big introvert in me. There's this drifty. Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. We're drifty, disconnected. And I love you all. It's just there's this reality of understanding the tension between needing the separation, which I get and I appreciate, and there's this part, but it's also interestingly, because as strong as an introvert I am, I don't often jump to the idea of the social connection being an influence. But I've noticed that with meetings and other things is when I'm burned out, which I am, when I'm exhausted, which I am, because it's the end of a quarter and there's so much going on and I'm sort of emotionally drained and all the rest, there's a tendency for me to, if I don't have a specific thing, I can be very present in the moment, but if I'm not present in the moment, I actually have a really hard time pushing the kind of connections. And so as I'm saying this is what we should do, I'm saying to myself, oh, watch it, Patrick. The things that you were starting to justify or give some excuses for, or just say, well, that's who I am, is actually not in keeping with the thing you're saying here. And now I've just lectured myself. And that's something that one reason maybe it was good to show up here. And so there's this sense of what is it a community does? We need the kind of people who remind us. We need the kind of people. So in here, there's some great chat, and I'm appreciating the chat. I'm appreciating the contributions. I'm appreciating the discussion. But also here, I wouldn't be saying this to myself, hopefully. I don't sit in my room and lecture myself. Sometimes you need a chance to exercise your gifts and exercise something where you're like, all right, I just need to get up and do the thing. And what happens is, in you being here and inviting me here and spending time with me, I'm actually saying, oh, I'm learning from us together because we've decided to gather as a community today. And I think as each of us are able to participate and not just listen and be passive, but as each of us are able to actually engage, we start realizing not just how we can help others, but there's this new kind of life in us. And this is when we say a Eucharistic community, we're not saying, here, take the elements and take it this way and do it this way, and this is what happens. There's part of that, and I can go into excruciating detail of what that means. So feel free in the comments, say, I want excruciating detail about the difference between transubstantiation and consubstantiation and whatever it is you call Ulrich Zwingli was doing. But I'm not going to do that. I might, I will take requests, but unless that's asked for, I don't think most of people care because most people are like, it's just something we do. But it's a good reason to find divisions. Yes, please do. I know. There's always that one person, right? I have flashcards. I'll get my what is it called? Flannel graph version of teaching on communion for next time. So, speaking of that, lest I forget, I will not be available for next week's session. I am going to be away for the time being. We are taking a vacation-ish thing as a way of seeing some family in elsewhere, and so I won't be home on Thursday night to do this, and so next week is off, but I'll be back in 2 weeks, and we'll move on to our next topic then too. So, flashcards and flannel graph. That's right. I have everything, and I might even. This is if I'm daring. If I'm really into saying taking this seriously, I might get out the overhead projector. I know. Am I daring too much? Am I going to blow people's minds with the advanced kind of pedagogical? Yes. So, where was I? Eucharistic community. And how better of a background? We're talking about Eucharistic community, and there in the background is the guy sitting at the table, right? So there's now I don't know what's going on there, right? So, weird turn. That became kind of sort of a monastic kind of table. Person cleaning in the background, some service, some people eating, some candles. This is all feeling very Eucharistic. But we're not talking about the elements. We're talking about really Eucharist means Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving isn't just something we eat do in November. It's not just something we say if someone does something nice to us. It's really a posture. And by a posture, I'm saying it's a way we can encounter life. We can encounter life cynically. We can encounter life in sort of an angry way, or we can encounter life in a thankful way. And as a posture, it means intentionally being attentive to the things that are positive. It's not being naive. It's not being like, I'm going to, not look at all the things that are bad and I'm going to ignore people who say bad things. It's not that at all. It's saying it's because life is difficult and hard and problematic that I need to say each day, and I need to have people around me who say, I know this is bad, but here's what's good. Here's the nice thing, because we get so caught up. I mean, social media is horrible on this, right? That we have this tendency to get caught up in the negative, and then all we see is the negative. And then we approach life in the negative. We expect the worst, we expect the bad. But a posture of thanksgiving says, this bad thing's not happening, but I'm going to be attentive to the good we have, the blessings we have. And a Thanksgiving community then is people who remind each other of roasted cows on spits and feasting, right? And all those good things. The Spirit provokes transformation, orienting us in a new way with and for others, integrating ourselves and our environment in tune with God's community. Yes, some very wise theologian wrote that, I believe. And if you ask, I can get you the book on a nice handy PDF. Or you could pay for $130. Don't tell the publisher I said that. Okay. Brian, I'm sorry. I'm having a lot of tension still, and you can pray for me so the confessions continue. So be a Thanksgiving community. Part of the reason the church is having a posture of thanksgiving, so that in the moments of crisis, we actually help bring perspective. The problems are there, but there's also good things. And we need, as people, as humans, this isn't just it's a religious thing. As people, we actually need balance in our emotional content so that we can actually be attentive to problems better. If we are constantly bombarded with problems and concerns and brokenness, we actually get worn down. We actually lose our ability to handle that with wisdom and discernment. And then we become so sensitive, and we can easily add to the brokenness out of our own brokenness. So we need this contrasting messages of thanksgiving and also lament to give us better emotional words and languages and experiences that help us to be in control of our emotions rather than let the world demand what our emotions do. We have to. It's like having an emotional diet. You have Thanksgiving is the fiber of our emotions, right? It just helps everything. You can. I don't know if that's going to go into a book. All right. What else? We are to correspond to God in our love and openness to the other, not seeking domination, but seeking the fullness of the other. How many of you would say this is your experience of church, or this is what you think of as church? So much of what has traditionally been called church is people who say they are speaking for God so that they can dominate others, so that then we can have control over their money or their time or whatever. And that is sadly a way that domination and oppressing comes back into the community of the church and undermines the very goals that we are able to seek. But if saying God so loves the world that he sent his son, God loves the world and loves the world so much he's willing to sacrifice for our salvation, for our fullness, for our hope, well, that's something a little different, right? We say now, what if we were to have that love as a community? If we were to say God is like this, so we too are called to be like this. Have the same mind in you as in Christ Jesus, Paul writes in the book of Philippians. Not so that we can say, this is what I'm owed and this is what I should get and you guys give it to me and I'm going to put all these rules so you feel guilty until you do. No, it's saying we have life and this is a blessing. There's possibility, even in different circumstances, difficult circumstances, to live this life out. How can I help you experience that fullness of life too? What if that was what we resonated as a community? I think that's what the church should be. That's what I believe in when I think of the church. But I too get discouraged because I don't always experience that, and there's tension and there's complications because, as we all know, the church is made up of people, and if there's one problem in organizations or getting things done, it's those other people. And me, maybe. So this is a proactive. This isn't saying, now, if you join together and gather together and have a Bible, this is what's going to happen. Really, this is saying, this is the possibility. This is an invitation for a group of Christians to come together and do this. Are you going to be proactive? And this is the convicting element for me too, because it's saying, don't be passive. Don't just expect things to happen and fit those things. I have to be proactive. It's not me saying, if you did all the right things, you did all the right things, that finally things would be right. We each have to say, this is a proactive invitation to me. You have to say, this is a proactive invitation to me, not to me. We all have to say, this is something we're all being invited to be proactive about, and not let other people's realities or concerns or brokenness or all the rest dissuade us from this purpose, because our hope is not in other people. Our hope is in the power of Christ. Our hope is in the presence of the Spirit. Jesus himself had some pretty negative encounters with people. Right? They crucified him. They did horrific things to him. And what was his response? God, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Because his hope wasn't in the Romans doing the right thing. The hope wasn't in the religious leaders doing the right thing. The hope wasn't even in the zealots doing the right thing. The hope was in the fact that in being faithful to God's calling, he was going to experience life in a new way that invited other people into this new life. And inviting them into that new life, there was a community of people that said, oh, you mean we don't have to worry about all this other stuff, we actually can live in the way we've been called to live. And in living in this way, we actually make changes that are richer and deeper than what the world thinks possible? Yes. That's what I believe in. Whew. Finding our fullness then isn't about me maximizing myself. So when we say it's always the other people, we can turn that around. I'm going to redeem that phrase. I said it's those other people, right? Oh, it's those other people that cause me problems. No, it's those other people that allow me to actually see myself, not in me handing myself over to them, but in the interactions, in the reciprocity, in the giving and sharing and the helping, the empowering. It's, if you've ever been in a situation where you're really helping someone come out of a difficult circumstance and they do, what is that feeling? You're like, wow, this is amazing, right? And so it's not finding our fullness in isolation. It's actually finding fullness in relationships, because another core human element is that we're very social creatures. We are innately, genetically, psychologically, spiritually, all the Lees you can think of. What's that, 1776? There's a musical song. Lee sings it. And all these things we are really is a way of saying we actually thrive with and for other people. What is the worst punishment they can do in prisons? If you're the worst criminal, you get thrown in solitary confinement. Well, what's the big deal about? I mean, I'm as an introvert. I'm like, whoa, I wouldn't mind being in solitary confinement for a little while. Be probably pretty quiet, but it actually causes significant psychological problems if you're alone too much and you don't have ways of navigating that. I mean, if you're alone in nature, I think that you get the community of trees and other things. But if you're actually isolated from other kinds of life, we start breaking down. And so even this social isolation that we're in now, some of us have families, like I have young kids, so I'm always around people. Other people are actually don't have that and are feeling a kind of desperation that they don't know how to handle, because we're actually not meant to be handling this. And so we have to find ways of bridging all the various concerns. So what does it mean to have fullness in relationship? It doesn't mean I'm handing myself over to someone so that they can give me meaning. It's saying, what does it mean for me to be me is really only found in how I love and interact with other people. Free participation. It's not forcing people. It's saying, now, if for me to be me, I actually have to make a choice on this. I have to be this proactive invitation of saying, with and among people, I am going to embrace a posture of thanksgiving so that I can participate with others in helping them experience life. And as we do this together, we start dancing together. Maybe even literally. Here, I'm doing my little dance. With and among people, not over and against people. The world tells us to respond to people over and against to get the things you deserve, to get power, because if you get power, then you have freedom. That's not true. Because if you're over and against, you find this isolation, and you may have a lot of stuff, but there's not peace. There's not rest. There's not that fullness. And so there's this unending drive to get something that you can't get, because we're meant to live in this deep, fulfilling kind of relationship. And this isn't about being married. It's not about all these ways that the world says this is what you have to have and you have to have this. It's actually about, this is where community comes in. And one of my problems with the current approach to marriage is, and I say current like in the last 500 years, and the Christian version, is we've isolated a sense of intimate community to a certain kind of relationship. And then that negates other kinds of community. And in doing that, we actually minimize the experience of community that we're all meant to share together. I have community with my wife, yes. But I wasn't then just freed. Oh, finally I can have community before I was married. I actually experienced a different kinds of fullness of community before I was married in different church groups. And it's that kind of community that allows a free participation, an inviting presence. Marriage is one kind of community. Married and singles together have different kinds of community. And the great joy, the benefit of when I was single is I could actually take a lot more emotional risks and reach out and had more time and all the rest. And so there was this broader network I was able to participate with than I am now, which isn't, it's not like better or worse. It's just these different kinds. But if we don't understand how we experience this free participation together in whatever situation we're in, taking a posture of thanksgiving, we become broken again, and we start deflating. God insists on a humanity that reflects back to the self-expression of his own creating identity. Ooh, that's good thick language. What do I mean by that? God wants us to respond to each other and to the world like he's responded to us. How has God responded to us? Well, he made us. He created us. What else has he created? He created trees. He created birds. He created beauty. Why is it we have an aesthetic? Why is it we say, oh, that's beautiful? Because there's something in us that resonates with the fact that something about a shape or form or picture or scene evokes some kind of emotional response. Well, that is a celebration. That is an honoring. But when we make things worse, when we break things down, we're actually going against how God said, because God wants to give us life. God gave us life. That's what God does. So how can we do that in the world we're in the community we're in? Ideas create as creative beings. We are creative beings. So when we restrain or restrict or deny that part of us, we actually are restricting our sense of our own freedom and possibility. And this doesn't mean like go out and paint a painting. It's like we're all made in different ways to be creative in different ways. We can talk about spiritual gifts or use this kind of Christianese language, but it really is, however we've been shaped, that actually evokes a kind of creativity. Some people are really great about hospitality. Other people are really great about helping other people. Some people are good at, we're all good at things. And when we're doing those things that give us life, and are exciting, we actually have a kind of creativity. One of the big turns in my life was I started writing, and I was really depressed after I finished my graduate school, and I didn't know where to turn. There was just a lot of broken doors and shut, and it just felt like these huge weights, and I was in this locked room, and I started writing. And every time I'd write, I would feel better. I would write fiction, short stories, and every time I'd write, I'd feel better. And then when I would go try to find a menial job just to pay rent, and I'd feel worse. I'd write 1,000 words in the morning, write a little short story. I'd feel like, oh man, life is possible. I try to make my way in the world in other ways. I'd be like, oh, this is horrible. And then I started realizing, oh, there's something in the writing that is bringing life out of me. And there's something just trying to pay rent that wasn't. So that actually created a massive turn in my own life. That still continues. I still have to say sometimes, oh, you know what, I haven't been creative. Oh, maybe that's how I've lost some sense of being in tune with myself. And we also have to get in the mix of things. We can't be this distant observer. If we're going to actually participate in a way that's transformative, being a redemptive presence, there's those mechanical spiders right there. I don't know how this would be an art of itself to make some kind of connection with what I'm talking about, with the idea that there's mechanical spiders in the background. Right. We actually have to get in the mix of life. We actually have to get out of ourselves and get in the mix of things, sometimes even if we don't want to. And like I said, I honestly didn't want to be here tonight, but just getting in the mix. I'm going to end this evening feeling better than I did before. And it was precisely because I said, get out of my head, get out, participate in the way I can. It's not going out and feasting together and hanging out with people. But we are hanging about. I'm inviting you to think about some shared thoughts. And by you being here and sharing this time, you're encouraging me that maybe I'm using my time wisely as opposed to whatever other way I might. All right. The cross, whatever furthers life, heals broken relationships and liberates life that has been oppressed. Woo! Imagine if this is what people thought of when they thought of church. Imagine if you were part of a community that wherever you were, you heal broken relationships and liberate life that has been oppressed. Now, if you think that's impossible, there have been moments in church history where this has actually really taken shape. where broken relationships were healed, life was not liberated, not in just a spiritual sense, though it was that. It was actually people were given freedom. There was this invitation. And one thing I love about hearing people who are new to Christianity is there's their stories of experiencing this conversion and freedom. It's like this glow about them where there was like, I can't believe this new feeling of life. Well, we don't stop simply with that moment of accept Jesus into your heart. We say this is actually a characteristic of how we approach everything. Are there broken relationships? How can we heal those? Is this oppressed situation going on? How can we help people find life in that? And which goes back to the very problem of a lot of the discussions now. In endorsing slavery, in perpetuating racism, forms of the church, and not all the church, but a significant enough portion embedded that in our society. So rather than liberating life, it offered more oppressing. Rather than healing broken relationships, it added to broken relationships. Rather than being the church of Christ, then, I would argue it was in that way the church of Satan. No matter what it was preaching, no matter what communion it was taking, if it was oppressing life, causing brokenness, dehumanizing people, it wasn't preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. What was it preaching then? I'm not the judge, but I'm a witness. And what I'm witnessing to is the testimony of Scripture and those who came before me, who expressed the fullness of what community is possible. And this is now an important experience. Tomorrow, I'm hearing a lot of people post about Juneteenth tomorrow, which is this. I'm actually really thrilled to see that because it's a long-standing holiday, and if you're not familiar with that, it's the June 19th was the day that the Emancipation Proclamation, not that it came into being or was first announced, but it was it finally was. I knew it had something to do with the Emancipation Proclamation and the celebration of the end of slavery, but the actual formal June 19th, I looked this up today. It's actually the day that it was proclaimed in Texas, and Texas, being the farthest west of the Confederate States, was the last to get the Emancipation Proclamation. And so in June 19th, 1865. All the slaves in the Confederate States were officially freed. Now, of course, that doesn't mean there was a lack of difficulty or a lot of chaos, but there was a sense of all the reality, all the death, all the chaos, all the fighting that the Civil War involved finally came to the moment where there were people who were freed. And there are people who say the Civil War wasn't about slavery. You know, that's just, I'm a historian, so when I say that's silliness, know what I'm saying here. It's not that it was only about slavery, but that was the core issue. And in this pursuit of life, I think there was a moment, we had a crossroads. We had a moment in which we said to those who were former slaves, you are free, go and live life. I think that was a moment of victory, not just for our society, which I think it was, but it was also the testimony of so many people in the church. Many of the leading abolitionists, including the founder of the Christian college I went to, made their life mission to free the slaves precisely out of their commitment to Christ. This is what they fought for. So it's a moment we honor and celebrate. On this day, freedom happened. Now, we also realize that June 19th, 1865 was not the end of the struggle, and that there was freedom, there was new possibilities, there was new awakening that was possible in the Reconstruction and afterwards. But rather than embrace this freeing message, this identity in Christ and community in a shared gathering, no matter people's class or system, what happened? Over the course of, even within a decade, the formal laws of slavery creeped back into different kinds of laws, and racism and all the rest came back in. So that rather than embracing the community that Christ offers here, confronting oppression, defining the mission of God in this expression of spiritual and physical freedom, it said, we don't want that gospel. We're going to live out something else. And now here we are, 2020. having to realize that road we were on way back in 1865 started on the right path, and then they just went back. And not only did they make a different turn, we actually turned around. And there's a deep sadness about that. But June 19th gives us hope that there is a way we can again say to all people, you are not only free, but we are in communion with you. You are brothers, you are sisters. We share a same hope. How can we not just stop oppressing you, but how can we share our life with you? That's an embracing Thanksgiving kind of vision in the context of some real problems. But the message again is hope, of possibility. Can we be a people now who going forward embrace the possibility? And I think that's what the church is intended to be, these possibility people. Theology of the cross looks inwards and outwards. It orients us spiritually, and it orients us spiritually with God. We become a new kind of people. We share the life of God, have the same mind in you that was in Christ Jesus, who was willing to sacrifice himself for the sake of others. He didn't make other people sacrifice for his sake. He said, all I have, I'm giving for you. Now, what if we all did that? The danger, of course, the risk is that what if I give out everything and then I'm just left lost and empty? This is where community comes in. If I pour myself out and everyone takes advantage of me, I need to be careful about myself. But if I pour myself out and other people are feeding back into me and other people are helping me, we become this mutual support group who are able to walk through the rhythms of life together. And in extending myself, I know that someone is going to be there to take my hands. And I know that I'm going to be there to take someone's hands. And in that, so we have this solidarity, not because I'm better than another person or I have all these gifts and it's not a paternalism. It's really this new kind of life of knowing that my life is in God so that I don't need to hold tightly to everything because there's people and purpose. Solidarity with those who have been abandoned undermines assumptions of power, control, and honor. If rather than say we're going to give in to the rules of society, we say, I'm going to identify with the broken and the outcast and the separate because that's where Jesus is. And I want to be where Jesus is. It's not me saying, well, these poor people need to be helped. It's, I want to experience the fullness of life too. And they have something that I need, which is their community. So openness to others, openness to a new kind of life, openness to whatever gifts and identity and a humanness that celebrates each other's humanness, doesn't demand we fit in certain kind of categories. And that is what I think the church should be. So Jesus is this brother in brokenness and exclusion. That's what the cross was. Where is Jesus in all this suffering and brokenness? Well, he's there. Jürgen Moltmann started off his theological journey asking a key question, where is God in Auschwitz? And some people couldn't answer that because they couldn't explain that kind of evil that happened and also explain Jesus. And what the message of the cross is that in context of suffering, where is Jesus? He's experienced the suffering. He's not immune to it. He's not outside looking in. He encountered that very same brokenness. Now, of course, the response is, so what? I don't need more people to share my hurt. But in sharing our brokenness, he also shares the hope. The hope we have in our brokenness in Christ is that we don't end in the brokenness. We don't end in the exclusion. Because when we join up with his story, he takes our hand and invites us into his future, which is resurrection, which is community, which is fullness, which is life. His future becomes their future. His future becomes our future. And that is a community of life that doesn't need to demand and control and dominate, because that's not what Jesus did. It's a community that says, we know you're broken. I'm broken too. Let's journey together because there's a way forward. There's a way of hope and life. So the cross is this place. This is why the cross, and I talked about the cross in more detail before, but the cross is this place where we say, I can't talk about the doctrine of the cross or the experience of cross and try to then also explain myself and justify myself and rationalize all my dysfunctions. I actually say, I'm broken. You know what? I'm I really have some problems, and I'm not going to try to fight or strive to get some approval and demand other people, honor me. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm I can't do this. I can't find the fullness of meaning and identity and purpose on my own. And so the cross, at this point, we stop before the cross and we say, that's the guy on the cross that is my hope. And he's identifying with me. He doesn't have to. He didn't have to do it. But he says, I'm going to come and identify with you. And I'm going to hold out my hand to you. And even if the world is right in saying your brokenness is, you've really done some bad things, and your judgment is worthy. The bad things you feel about yourself actually may be rational things to feel bad about if we've done certain bad things and hurt people and done some horrible things in our life, or even we've just been caught up in distractions and caused alienation. It's like, this is something. But also those other people, the world says this is their definition, this is their worth, this is their value. We're all coming to the same place and saying, the world doesn't define us anymore. My job doesn't define me. How certain academic administrators respond to me doesn't define me. Now, it helps because I enjoy having a steady salary, but there's a certain reality of, but it doesn't define my value and my worth and my contribution. Who does? Jesus does. And in light of that, now we're surrounded by people who sharing in the same kind of brokenness, who sharing in the same kind of abandonment of trying to define themselves over against others and trying to define themselves in light of the world's status symbols. Say, here we are together, humans, like we're going to shed off all the pretenses. And we're going to say, what does it now mean to find community together and to live life with hope that God has redeemed our stories and our past, so that we're not committed to the judgments of our past, the brokenness of our past, but there's actually a community of people who said and are saying, let's find life together. I believe in you. I believe in you, Jesus, and that means I say to others, I believe in you because Jesus died and invited us into a new kind of life together and empowers that new kind of life. That is the church I believe in. That is what the community of Jesus is, because that's the expression of Jesus. Remember when we talked about Jesus a while back, and I talked about the life of Jesus? We can't talk about the church of the body of Jesus and separate it from the person who lived and died and was resurrected. But so often we do, because we make the Christianity about this religious, about us trying to navigate, the supernatural, and it's not that at all. It's about living this life in a new way in light of our new identity and sharing this new kind of life so that the world begins to see a different kind of humanity again. We speak into hope, we speak into life, we speak into possibilities. Cross confronts false and temporary forms of peace by refusing to accept it as true peace. A theology of the cross can never be private, it can never be non-political, because the thing about people is we're not segmented people. We live life. And Jesus didn't just come to save, the religious side of me. What did God create? Everything. And what's everything? All the things. And so what does this theology of the cross confront? It confronts all the different kind of brokenness in every system and in every part of society, so that we are invited into this new kind of reality. It's definitive. It defines us. It also confronts us. It confronts dysfunctions of the world. The world tries to say, here, this defines you, or that defines you, or this defines you. And the cross says, no, you're not going to get anywhere with that. It's going to lead to brokenness and death. But it also says, we're not going to leave you empty. We're going to say, there's a new path. Come, join this community so that together we can actually find the fullness of meaning. Not in like a culty or like a weird way, in like a really like peaceful, beautiful way. It's a choice then. That's the thing. It's not a cult. This is a choice. It's us saying, I'm ready to let the rest of this stuff go. And I'm going to join with other people who are ready to let this go. And if you're not ready to let this go, you know what? God still loves you and bless you on your journey. But for me, I realize that all that stuff has led me down a bad road and leads me down a bad road. So I want to gather with people who are saying there's a new way to do this. The trouble with the church in a lot of forms is that you have people with a lot of mixed motives who say, I want to identify with Jesus, but I don't want to actually give everything up, and I'm not willing to confront the own brokenness in my own life, and I'm not really to be defined by Jesus, but I want to play a game. And then those kind of people then start saying, well, I'm going to play a game, and then make other people play the game, because then it becomes more about power. It's the way of Rome. So what is a way of liberating practices that express this kind of life and hope? Welcome people who are different. Don't be around people who agree with you and look like you and have the same hobbies. And this is not just true for color of our skin, but also true about politics. Be around people who you may otherwise sharply disagree with, and the internet says you have to hate. And rather than hate them, say, God loves them, and I can disagree with them, but there's something about God's work in them I need to hear. And together we actually can find a new kind of wisdom that the political system can't give, because the political system thrives on division and separation and inciting the kind of rage that then gets us excited. But rather than what we say, we can say no to that and say politics is important. It's important to have perspectives on things and seek answers, but we might disagree on that. And you know what? That's fine. Because if we're committed as a community together, we actually maybe, I think we can, hear a way of the Spirit in us that says there's different answers. Or maybe the kinds of questions we're asking are the wrong kind of questions, so let's come over here and talk about this thing. And not just welcome the stranger, not say, oh, this person's coming in, I'm going to welcome you, but actually invite, go out among them. Where was Jesus found? Jesus was found in and among the streets. He didn't just sit in the temple and say, everyone come to me. He said, I'm going to go walk. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go here. I'm going to eat dinner with this guy. And the religious leaders said, you can't do that. And Jesus said, I don't care what you say. I'm the one who's doing it. I'm the one who's inviting people in, and not so he can control them, and not so that he can dominate them and say, aha, look how many followers I have, because he wanted to give them life. He was so full of life himself. He said, how can I help you experience more of life? Sometimes that was healing. Sometimes that was encouragement. Sometimes that was actually saying a sharp, difficult word, because sometimes people who are misbehaving need to be called out, right? We who have kids know all these things can happen in the same afternoon. So we have to be attentive to what does it mean to invite people who are on the outside, who may not understand what we're doing, may not, or have a misconception. So how can we be people who invite others in? Shall we invite the dragon in? Ooh, even if they spit fire at us? Maybe. All right, we've gone a little over, and I didn't get as far as I'd like, but I think this is good stuff. So rather than moving on in 2 weeks, I think I'm just going to finish this section off and continue with church again. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Next week, feel free to watch one of the videos on my YouTube channel that you missed. Feel free to join in, or just feel free to go out for a walk and talk to other people, and maybe have a conversation with someone you haven't talked to for a while and say, how can I help you experience life more? How is your life going? And have some community time. So God bless you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for sharing with me. I know I didn't get to respond to everyone. Facebook is still a little slow at times, but I really appreciate you being here. It's sometimes when you do something like this, it becomes very lonely, and you're like, well, you get that rationalizing, well, what's the point? There's not many people. But when I see each of your names here, and the names here at the beginning, and the names here, then as people come through, I say, oh, there's a real person there. That's something. Maybe something I'm saying is for them. And so thank you for being here, and feel free to email me, patrickoden@gmail.com, and have a great week. Experience life this week and give hope to others. I think if we do that as a community and as people, we'll experience then what it means to say we're the church anew.